You might not immediately think it on the surface, but this watch actually represents me putting into practice quite a few different concepts, ideas and desires that I've discussed on the channel before. I've talked about the idea of try before you buy using an inexpensive model, wanting to own a red watch in my collection, and being unafraid to try out new brands before judging them. So when I saw the cost to entry on this Benyar model, I thought there was no harm in giving it a try, especially as this watch isn't just a tame shade of red, it's actually really vibrant. And I think that's a very unusual quality in a watch at almost any price point, based on the previous top 10 red watches list that I've produced. While it might be a potential stepping stone for me personally, I wanted to give you my thoughts on the watch and discuss whether or not it's worth adding to my collection or if it needs to find a new home on eBay. With all that said, let's get into this episode of Keep or Sell. Let's start by talking about that colour. And I think this is a really significant talking point because this model is available in lots of colourways, almost all of them pretty vibrant. You've got the red model that you're seeing here, but also green, yellow, sky blue, and a pretty tame black on offer. The yellow and red options are the best bet in my opinion if you're going to go down the experimental route. They're both so bright you're definitely going to find out whether or not the colourway suits you if you're eyeing up a more expensive purchase in a similar colour. The outlay to find out is incredibly low, with this model coming in just under $23 at the time of writing. One thing I will make clear at this point is that you shouldn't even consider buying this from Amazon or eBay. The markups there are insane, with some people trying to sell these for just over $100. While I think there is a fair discussion to talk about whether or not this is good value for money at its $23 price point, and we will get into that, I can tell you categorically that it's not worth anywhere near $100. Especially if you are knowingly paying that price just to get it in your hands a little faster. I can understand people not wanting to give their details over to a site like Wish, Temu or AliExpress, or being worried that their goods will take a long time to arrive. These are all valid concerns, but with a watch this inexpensive, I just don't see the value in spending 2 to 5 times the cost on it. As we're discussing value, let's look now at what you actually get for your money. Now, I will say that actually getting an accurate spec sheet for this is not that easy. There are typos and poor translations in a lot of what you'll find online. So let's start with perhaps the most important feature. For your $23 outlay, you're actually getting an automatic movement here. And while you might question how good or accurate an automatic at this price point would be, I found recently that actually some quartz movements are pretty inaccurate too around this price point, which has shifted my perspective slightly. At the very least, this movement comes from Seagull, a brand that you may well have heard of before, as they actually produce a quarter of all mechanical and automatic movements in the world. The movement in question is the ST6, and thankfully, as I've gotten around to finally getting my time grapher set up that I bought for the channel 4 months or so ago, I don't have to guess at how accurate it is, or base it on the figures provided, which I actually can't locate. I can tell you, or at the very least I can try and show you. This is my first time having a go with one of these, so I'm hardly an expert. Essentially, what we're looking for in a perfect movement is an almost straight line on the time grafter after having fully wound the watch. That is definitely not what you're getting here, no matter which angle you set it to. I'm not going to try and explain all these figures as an expert might, as I think that would be disingenuous as I'm still learning myself. But I think it's safe to say that you need to set the time on this every day to get any real kind of accuracy from it. Now, I've mentioned one well-known Chinese brand here in Seagull already, and while Benyar might not be a name you've come across before, they are actually a subsidiary of a brand you're far more likely to have heard of, Pagani Design. Essentially, Benyar is to Pagani what Tudor is to Rolex, a more affordable offshoot brand. Now that might sound a bit nonsensical given the already low price point of the Pagani, but what I've learned is that you need to look at the economy of scale when it comes to these sub-brands, because yes, Pagani models are pretty affordable, but most of them are at least double the cost of any given Benyar, and some are magnitudes more. Now, I have tried out the Pagani Speedmaster Homage before, and I thought it was pretty impressive. My understanding is that all of these watches are actually manufactured in the same giant factory. So let's discuss whether or not the quality control and build standards are the same. You've got to set your expectations here, of course. If you hear anyone tell you that this has Grand Seiko level finishing or bulletproof build quality, I'd be immediately dubious if they were paid to say it. If you look at this in context, the watch is a lot better than it has any right to be at this price point though. Everything feels solid. The crown in particular feels unbelievably smooth. You're not getting a screw down here, but setting the time and day is a genuinely nice experience. The bracelet is slightly tapered, wide and thick, and doesn't have a great deal of rattle to it at all. The clasp operates with 2 pushers at the side for a release mechanism, and just like the crown, is a surprisingly smooth experience to use. Perhaps the most important consideration when it comes to a budget bracelet is comfort though, and this doesn't rip hair or pinch. While it fits like a glove for me, there's no micro adjust or mini links in the bracelet, so there is the potential for having some issues with finding the perfect size. The back of the watch reveals an exhibition caseback, which is unusual at this price point, and I think it's genuinely something quite impressive to be getting a customised and engraved rotor to look at for such a small financial investment. As far as obvious tells that this watch is cheap, I think that the lack of a Cyclops, or any kind of magnification for that matter, alongside the tiny date window is the only really blatant tell. Beyond that, you'd have to look at elements like the chunkiness of the watch. It doesn't feel particularly refined, but that can be as much of an aesthetic choice as an engineering one. The only other giveaway is in the small details, the quality of the print work, markers and the smoothness of the movement, which, while not bad, you can see that it's not a high-end movement by watching the sweep alone. As for the design itself, it's pretty inoffensive stuff, and certainly not original. It's actually so vanilla that it's really hard to comment too much on. I think the best and worst that I can say about it is that it's fine. Really, it's a homage to the coral red dial Rolex Oyster Perpetual, and they've not done the worst job ever with the tracing paper here. But at the same time, I don't think the model they're copying is the pinnacle of design either. I would also call it fine. When it comes to use case scenarios, I think the most obvious uses for this watch are as a testing bed for a big future purchase, something in the same style or colour as I've previously discussed, or I dare say it has some solid potential as a beta. Now, my review, I hope, has been fairly neutral so far, with some pros and some cons, but nothing standing out as amazing, so you might be thinking that this is an easy sell in terms of the premise of the video. However, I can reveal that I will actually be keeping this in my collection, but not for any of the potential previously stated reasons. I'm going to be keeping this not so much as a watch to wear, but to use for future comparison videos on the channel. This is the cheapest automatic watch I've ever bought, and it actually outperforms quite a lot of the other Chinese automatics that I've owned that were more expensive. So I'm going to keep it around so that I can use it as a comparison, a yardstick to other offerings in the future. Now, it isn't exactly setting a high bar, but when you run a channel focusing on budget watches, I do think this makes for a really good starting point for the minimum quality you should expect and indeed demand. A watch that has a fair level of accuracy, dubious on that one, but an automatic movement, exhibition caseback, comfortable bracelet and solid build quality all round is a pretty tough order to beat when the cost was only $23. But I guess time will tell. As for whether or not I would recommend it to anyone else to purchase, I think if your expectations are set in the right place and you have a use case in mind, there's really no harm in it. This isn't a great watch, but it's very hard to beat at the asking price. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this in the future.